Welcome to Whispers in the Wings with director, choreographer, performer, and writer Kathleen Ann Thompson, artistic director of Bellhurst Productions. Kathleen discusses on the program an approach to some of the most challenging and complex theatrical techniques which thespians are known to whisper about in the wings of the stage. Kathleen's 25 years' experience with directing 3 schools for movement theater and directing 2 theater companies, as well as writing and performing award-winning productions for Bellhurst, has given her a lifelong love of theater. Her enthusiasm to elevate the craft of theater for all types of performers and theatrical endeavors is uplifting. We hope you will be stimulated and inspired by these discussions. Hi, everybody. It's been a long time since I posted on this channel, a very long time. I hope to be a little more prolific in the year to come. It occurred to me in the last few weeks that there was a lot of questioning, a lot of interest in how do I rehearse alone? I don't really feel adequate to do that. Now, in my schools, we heavily emphasize auto coursework. That means you take information, techniques that you've learned during the school day, and you apply them within a specified structure. You take them, rehearse them, put them together in a little devised piece, and then present it at the very end of the day. So having done that for so many years, I found that this was really a subliminal query. I would say over half of the students who felt really inadequate to do this rehearsal project. So I wanted to address that because it is a subject that we don't read about in the textbooks. We don't hear a lot of drama coaches or directors ever mentoring people on, and somehow you're just supposed to know how to do that. So the subject is, how do I succeed at rehearsing alone? So I've divided the talk into 3 parts. 1, the resistances, why we don't want to do that, why it often seems to be a burdensome task for us. And the second section then will be about the actual procedure. I'm going to outline a very good procedure for you, and I think if you follow it, you will have great success at it. And third, a small section on what are the end rewards of this. So we find ourselves often in a position, especially now with all of the COVID regulations and the irregularities to the way we used to live life, we find ourselves, I think, more often than not in a position of having to, quote, do for ourselves in a way that we didn't before. So that would include rehearsing our own piece, our piece that we intend to perform without the assistance of a director or teacher being there. So in this first section of resistance, I think the things I hear all the time are, 1, I'm so tired and I have so many other things to do and it seems like it just takes too long. So I would say to that particular point about being too tired, that actually I think you'll find when I'm through with the procedure that rehearsal actually energizes us rather than makes us more tired. But it is true that the whole principle in physics behind inertia is something that we have to look at. So it's best not to think about how tired you are, but simply to schedule an appointment with yourself. Write it down on whatever calendar or in your phone or wherever you do your scheduling as an authentic date, time, and purpose to this rehearsal. That way, it's something you don't have to think about, debate about at the time when the time is drawing near. It was in your schedule, and you scheduled it in, and you will go. You will just do it. Because the resistance is mostly because of inertia. It's because you're not moving in that direction. So if you try to obviously push a train, if that were even possible, from a stop, why it would take many, many, many multiple times more effort, force to get that train moving than it would if it could be pushed after it was already moving. After it was already moving, the force would be much less needed to move it. So this is what you're dealing with, and you can't really address that problem logically. It really won't work. You'll just end up rationalizing with yourself and making an excuse for why you can't do it now, why you couldn't do it yesterday or the day before. So just ignore that. Get that out of the way right away. Just shove it out the door. Make an appointment, Tuesday, 3 o'clock. I'm going to rehearse for 45 minutes. And look at your calendar and don't even question. I don't care what I feel like. I don't care how tired I am. I'm going. I have never, honestly, I can say this. I have the same feeling. I'm not unusual. It's pretty much human nature. But I can say this, that I have never gone into rehearsal and come out of rehearsal feeling exhausted, tired, wiped out. I have always come out of rehearsal feeling energized, so happy I did it, and creatively inspired. Second thing, break the frame when you're dealing with a resistance to going and rehearse. So normally, if we're busy doing something very specific, let's say you're at the computer and you are working on another project, all right? And the time rolls around where you're supposed to rehearse. Well, unless there's an absolute deadline need that you finish that project, you will not find yourself easily breaking the framework where your attention is to finish that project. You're into that project. There's a certain kind of focus and mental attitude, and it's not easy to break those frames. Or let's say you're doing something else. Let's say maybe you are outside working. You're working maybe in your garden or around the house where you live. That's a certain kind of, again, same routine, disorienting, but it doesn't usually take long before you find a friend, you know the routine, and you're into it. And it's the same way with rehearsing. Also, one last suggestion. Reward yourself. So if you have a scheduled appointment to rehearse at 3:30 on Tuesday, and you actually make it to the rehearsal, and you've disciplined yourself to do that, give yourself a little reward and say to yourself, okay, when I'm through with this 45 minutes, I'm going to sit down and have a sweet and a cup of coffee, or whatever it is that makes you, that is a reward for you, all right? If it's at night, I'm going to get a nice warm bubble bath and read a book for a half hour and sort of veg out. Whatever it is that is a reward for you, find a little reward and promise that to yourself if you make this rehearsal and if you succeed. We love to be rewarded, and we respond really well to being rewarded. Okay, so let's talk now about the procedure, all right, in this part 2, which will be the longest part. So, number 1, in order to start a rehearsal, you really have to have a plan, a structure, so that you, again, don't have to go, oh gosh, I don't know exactly what to do here, and you just start practicing, your piece as best as you know it. This is not a good way to begin. Have a plan, And this is a plan I've used for years and years, and I think it's been confirmed by a lot of real experts in theater that do something very similar. So I offer this to you. It's 3 parts again. Number 1 is rehearse the parts. Start with the parts. So what do I mean by parts? Well, I'll give you a little metaphor. I was working in a foreign country, Latvia actually. There was a man who ran the place where we were rehearsing and having our school, and he was actually in love with Jeeps, and he had an old Russian Jeep. But this Jeep was absolutely just fantastic. It had 2 complete gear shifts, very complicated. This Jeep could do anything. It could go almost straight up and straight down, and he used to love to take us all for rides if we were very brave. And one day I came, and I said, "Where's your Jeep?" And he said, "Oh, you can't ride in it now because I'm fixing it." He said, "I'll show you where it is." And he took me out into a very big barn-like structure. And the floor of this barn was just cement, but it was clean as a whistle. And here was his Jeep sitting in the middle of the floor. But the Jeep was not together, so there were no wheels on it. Almost everything was taken out of this Jeep. There was just the chassis and the shell, the outer shell of the Jeep, which was on the floor in the center. Everything else was completely taken out. The entire engine and all of its parts were taken out, and the wheels were off. And it was so beautiful. I was stunned because he had laid all of the parts, every little bolt, every little valve, every little rod, every little part there was, he had laid out in absolute order, very neatly around the car in a proximity to where it was going to be installed. And it was truly like a beautiful modern art picture. It wasn't just casually thrown there. No, all the parts were lined up. All the parts of a certain size were together and laid individually next to each other. And the whole thing just made an incredibly beautiful design. And I was so shocked by this. I said, "My gosh, I never saw anybody do that." And he said, "This is a very complicated car. And if you're going to fix a car, you have to know what every part does and where it goes and how it relates to other parts. So I just make a picture of it, and then it's much easier for me to fix it." And I walked away from that experience and applied it to rehearsing, and then later started teaching it to my students. So when I say rehearse the parts, I mean to take your piece apart, whether it's a 5-minute little improvisation, or whether it's a 2-act play, or whether it's a 1-act solo piece, whatever it is that you have devised or somebody has created for you, but now you must rehearse it alone. Take apart that thing. So I would suggest, number 1, that you start with the lines or the text. And there may not be a text. It could be you're doing a mime piece or a dance piece that doesn't have any text. But if you have text of any kind, that would include songs, you must really start there. One of the biggest mistakes people make is to try to rehearse a piece with a script in their hands or sheet music in their hands. So first, you must put your lines in your memory, and the lines or the text, the lyrics of a song, or anything else that you might be doing verbally in the show, and get that down. So when you go to learn your lines, you should be learning them never, ever sitting down. So the wrong way to learn lines is to learn them sitting in a chair with a cup of coffee, all right? Instead, you should learn lines on your feet, moving in an improvisational way as you are going to move in the play. So without specific blocking, you need to move in the style and the rhythm and the character requirements of that character, because how you move as a character, it affects greatly your line. It affects it from a rhythmic standpoint. It affects it from a pacing standpoint. And if you learn lines just quantitatively, just learning words, you will forget them almost as easy as you learned them. But if you learn lines connected with movement that is a part, maybe not specifically, but is in the general frame of your character and the event of your creation there, you will find the lines stick a lot more. And I have to always throw in my most favorite story about this when I teach this, because I was performing a piece many years ago. It was quite a long piece. It was a little over 2 hours. It was a solo piece, and it was 77 pages of text, and most of that text was poetry. So it was not an easy piece to learn or perform. And I was on opening night, and I had never performed that long of a solo piece. So I got in the middle of the first act, and suddenly I went up for lines, as we say in the theater. That means that I couldn't remember. I blanked on the next line. And I didn't want to improvise a line because of, number one, as I said, most of this was poetry that you must not improvise with. Also, I was afraid I would pick up a line that would throw me into the second act. I would be finishing the show very early because I would continue on from that point. So I didn't want to just improvise a line. I couldn't, but I blanked. And I know that when you blank on the stage, unless you're going to improvise, the worst thing you can do is to try to remember. So I knew I had to do something to stimulate the memory. It would come up by itself. I knew my text very well, so it wasn't a matter of me really not knowing the text. And so I started to just walk around the stage, and the setting of this particular scene was a living room parlor in the 19th century. So this character had a lot of pictures and knickknacks and things like that on the surrounding furniture of this room. So I just started to walk in that character's normal movement, you could say, how this character always walked, how she used her hands, how she the kind of pace she kept when she was moving. And I just started to walk around and look at all of the pictures and the knickknacks on the shelves and that kind of thing, as if I was taking some kind of inventory of my things on the shelves. And all of a sudden, my eye fell on a picture. And that picture was of a horse. And the line, bingo, just popped into my mind, and I turned around to the audience. I picked up the picture. I turned around toward the audience, and I said, "Did I ever tell you that my father loved horses?" And that was the line, of course. And that was it. I sailed through the rest of the play without a hitch. But it is an example of how your body memory, your muscle memory, is a powerful tool connected to the somatic brain, where you have stored long pieces of necessary memory work, such as the 77 pages of a play you're doing. And it's your best connection, action is, to a lost momentary memory on the stage. So, number one, learn your text. And if you're singing, learn the lyrics to your song, and do that by walking around. You can play around with different kinds of movement that character might make, or that event might demand of you. So if you were at a funeral, your movement would be very, very different than if you were at an exciting birthday party. And just begin to associate that general movement with your words. It will also help you begin to think about pacing and rhythm of that character. That gets your script out of your hands, because if you start your rehearsal with a script in your hands, you are already cutting out a huge portion of stimulating creativity, because your hands are bound. They're no longer free. They're not able to participate in what could be a very creative physical act that comes to you. You won't do it because your script is in your hands, and because your eyes are down and your head is down and you're looking at your script. So that's number one part. Second part that you need to take apart and isolate is the blocking. So when I say blocking, I'm using it in a very traditional theater sense of creating a large movement pattern that moves you from one stage area to another, and the general floor patterns that you make as you cross meaning to move from one stage area to another. So when you consider your entrances, your exits, and the stage areas that you visit, and the crosses that you make in order to move from one area to the other, we call this blocking. It is general. It's not specific. So you should have a blueprint, a very good diagram of the movement that you make in your piece. So you're not wandering around the stage. So wandering around the stage with happy feet is one of the most insecure things you could do. You really need to be using stage management skills at stage positions, stage areas, crosses, and the knowledge of upstaging and focus in order to communicate very specific things about your piece. So it is a language. Stage management is a physical language that you use to tell the story in physical terms. So you want to think about your piece as a story, even if it's not specifically a story, but a narrative of another kind, and to try to tell it without the script, without the words, but simply physically, by entering the stage and knowing where you're going to be meeting somebody, where you're going to make a stop, where you're going to commit an action, and where your next place is going to be, and consider the kinds of crosses you are making. So there's diagonal crosses, vertical, horizontal, circular crosses, and to understand the other characters that may be on that stage with you or may not, and to consider all that and to make a kind of general blueprint. So when I go to perform at a venue that I've never been to before, and since I'm not performing usually in a resident theater, but in more casual spaces, almost every venue is new for me. And so when I go in there and have my time of rehearsal, one of the first things I do is to walk my floor pattern and my basic blocking. So I walk it, so I orient myself to the space and orient myself to the basic expression of the story, of the drama, through physical activity. Okay? So this right away orients me to my space, and it brings to remembrance my text, and gives me a good sense of orientation, and this is really important. Without orientation on the stage, we feel very insecure, and if we're changing venues, we're not always in the same performing space, it can be very alarming and can interfere a lot with our focus. Okay, next thing is the third section to rehearsing the parts, and that is to isolate out of your piece difficult tasks, places where maybe you have to multiple skill and where speed is a concern, or difficult technical things that you must do. So maybe I have to make a triple turn as a dancer right there and come out of it in balance and speak a word to somebody. Okay, that would be a difficult task. In my last show, I had to undress and change my costume completely on stage in full view of everybody within a certain time frame. And the costume was multiple layered. It was a very difficult costume to get in and out of. And the new one was also difficult in another way. So this was a difficult task, and I needed to pull that out and just work technically that part, just work on the whole, taking off the clothes. So the hand's in the right place, the focus of my eye is not down looking at my hand, struggling with my zipper, but out communicating with the audience. And I can take off my clothes without drawing any attention to it at all, making it smooth and as if it were the easiest thing in the world. Same thing with creating the new costume in view of everybody. So it may be a difficult mime phrase that you have to perform, or it can be anything, a part of a song that you must try to have an authentic emotion with and yet control the voice technically so that you can reach a high note or a low note or a sustained note. So whatever it is, that there will be spots in your program and your presentation that are really quite difficult. Pull them out and rehearse them separately so that you can work the technique by itself and in an orderly way. Okay, little hint about working skilled parts, places that require specialized skill, technical skill. The very basis of art is rhythm. And so it's one of the first things you should consider in working your part that's difficult. What is the rhythm of this particular phrase of movement or this particular task that I must perform? Finding that rhythm will be your first objective, and it will be your best spent effort. Once you find the rhythm, the other things will fall into place more quickly. Second, you should think about, if it's music, you should think about melody. Training your ear to hear pitch and tone is extremely important. And if you have problems with this, or your ear just isn't educated long enough, sing with it, then sing without a recording of it and record yourself. Then again, listen to the recording or somebody else singing it who can record the melody for you, and then sing it without that support and record it and listen to it. This is the way you begin to train your ear to hear pitch, tone, and rhythm. The third aspect of that is, and part of what makes skillful sections of our piece difficult, is the dramatic substance that goes along with that difficult task. So in my case, the woman who was changing her clothes was very, very, very shy, coming out of the early 1900s, and where women wore a lot of clothes and covered up most of their bodies, having to take those clothes off in a place where she didn't have absolute privacy was extremely difficult for her. And of course, she was not just shy, but she felt rather humiliated and completely without any protection. So that dramatic contact, that dramatic substance is something I want to work as I'm working these skilled parts into the movement itself. Because dramatic content, especially if it's a very emotional, will affect very much the way your fingers work, the rhythm at which you are able to do something, and it can be a real problem. It's definitely an added stimulus to just a mechanical task. So you could learn to do 3 maybe pirouettes, work on your technique for a triple pirouette and a balance afterwards. But if in that triple pirouette and that balance afterwards, that step balance afterwards, I was supposed to reflect the fact that I was escaping from an evil force and then confronted by a second evil force in which I step forward and balance in a state of absolute catatonic fear and terror. Oh, this would definitely change the way I would do that triple pirouette, because dramatic action will always take the body into tension, and that means the body will be off balance. So triple pirouettes need to have an absolute center of balance, and it's pretty fragile. So if I add fear to that, I'm making it much more difficult. So adding that dramatic content then, after you've worked on rhythm and other things that are a part of the mechanical technique there, adding the dramatic content at the last will be the place where you can then take that part and we're going to put it back into the whole. So you have three things, 3 parts that you're taking in your little play or your big play. And that is the text, all the text out, and then all of the blocking, the general blocking in, knowing what your floor patterns are, your areas of playing, and then working each individual difficult spot until you have a handle for the multiple skilling or the difficult dramatic content or whatever it is. Okay, the second part then of this structure is to reassemble the parts. So once they're out, you've looked at them, you know what they are, you know their relationship to one another. Now we have to start reassembling. So the best way is the way that we learn music. If we want to memorize music, it's called collection. So if I want to memorize a piece of music is divided into measures. So I will learn the first measure and play it over and over and over again. And then I will do the same with the second measure of music. And then I will collect them together so that then I finally work on the 1 followed by 2 measures and slowly begin to add measures. Then it will be 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. I'm sort of oversimplifying this, but I think you get the picture. Just rehearse from the beginning and then add 2. And get that down a certain number of times till you feel like, yes, I have it, I know it now. I don't have to look at my notes or my paper, I got it now. And keep on doing this until you reassembled your entire piece in a linear fashion from beginning to end. Now, don't stop and work on the individual parts, like the difficult parts. Just sort of glide over them, gloss over them at this point, because the goal is not that. The goal isn't in-depth working on individual parts. It is to put the whole piece together, all right? So that's your aim in reassembling and collecting. So as you do this, you might, for instance, first of all, I would divide my piece, even if it was a small piece, divide it into basic actions, all right? So even if it's a 5-minute piece, divide it it will fall, if it's a good piece, into parts. Parts that have different either motivations and intentions, or parts that are of a different time and space than other parts, or parts that are growing in terms of developing a certain understanding or expression that you're going to give out. So going back to my most recent piece that I was doing called Hidden, it was pretty much a narrative of this person's life as they made their transition from America to India as a missionary. And so I had worked on the whole idea of this person aging through several decades. So I divided my piece into 7 parts that I could easily compartmentalize the basic time and place that they took place in her life and the general age that she was at that time. So somehow divide your piece into parts. But another way to then collect and to take advantage of this principle of collection is to collect different parts together. So let's say your piece doesn't really divide up into parts very well, and maybe it's of a different genre, such as a narrative genre or something. So then I would begin by rehearsing one of the major parts, such as the text, and then add to it the blocking, add to it the physical language, and then rehearse those two together. And then I would add to that the full technically difficult parts and bring those in so that I had those 3 things together. You can even do that if your piece does divide into parts. So if it divides nicely into scenes or parts that you can work on and then just add one to the other until you have them all together, you could also do an internal collecting, such as take the first part, the first scene, let's say, and do it just from text, just verbally, then collect your blocking and your physical design of this scene and put that together, and then rehearse it a 3rd time, adding in your special difficult parts in that area. And then go back to the other collection and add your next scene to that. Work your 2nd scene and then add it to the first. So the whole idea of collection, starting with one part and then adding another, always using repetition as the major source at this point of rehearsing, all right? Okay, after you have reassembled now the whole piece, no matter how big it is, you have it all together. You from beginning to end, you know what it is. You don't need your text. You have your basic blocking down. You've worked on your especially difficult parts and have them stuck in there at a reasonable level of competency at this moment. Then it would be the time to do what I call a stop and go. So this is another kind of rehearsal. You begin at the beginning of your play linearly, and you stop at any one point to build what I call the fascia of the scene. So the fascia is like the fascia in your body. It's like the fascia in your body is a netting of tissue that molds around your joints, molds around your organs, and really holds the body together. So it is true. It's a medical fact. If I took out all the bones and organs and tendons and muscles of your body, if that were possible, and not your fascia, I would still be left with a perfect, absolutely perfect model of your organs and your limbs from your fascia. So within the skeleton of your blocking that we have already put in, and the difficult spots that we worked on requiring a lot of skill, and the verbal part of your show, there's a huge amount of room in there for spontaneous creativity and a sense of developing contextual fascia, okay, things related to one another. So the thing about fascia is it connects everything together. It is the spider web that connects all the points together. So now that you have the skeleton done, you need to creatively fill it out and connect all the parts together so that they flow and they have a contiguity to them. Here is where you can use improvisation really well, and where your own creative ideas are stimulated and come to the front. So let's say that you are entering and you hang your hat on a hat tree, and you need to go to downstage left corner because another character in the play is going to meet you there and convey a message to you. Okay, so that's the basic skeleton plan. Perhaps my text says, good morning, Tom. Sorry I'm late. Maybe my difficult task in that particular scene was to try to hit the clothes stand with my hat by me tossing the hat there, and a little trick that I can get it on the peg on the first try. Okay, but there is still, you see, space between my saying hello and my meeting my friend Tom down in downstage left corner to hear what he wants to tell me. So there is my motive for why I came here today. Was this pleasurable? Was I forced to come here? Was I just casually dropping by? That affects very much my movement. The way in which I try to get my hat on that ring. Is it out of competition because I feel competitive with Tom? Or is it just to show off because Tom thinks I'm an idiot, a blundering idiot, and I want to prove that I'm not? Or is it really because Tom is a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant business guy? I want to impress him with my skill and try to get a feeling of status advancement before I meet him. Okay, so with that intention in mind and that motivation for my action, I try to improvise my movement down to downstage left. Just what is going to be exactly my pathway down there? I have designed basically a diagonal pathway. That's the straightest way down there. But how? Do I stop and pick up a paper on my way down in the chair and try to arrive already preoccupied reading the paper so he doesn't think I'm so anxious to see him? Or do I put my hands in my pocket and set my eyes upon him and move down there with a straight arrow kind of thrust, giving him an idea that I'm here for business and I mean business and I'm here to challenge him and call him to account? So play around with the way in which you can walk down there, the way in which you make that cross, and other action that may happen along the way that would fill out the fascia of that scene, giving the audience a much greater understanding of your action. It isn't just a logistical, I'm going down to meet Tom in downstage left, but is actually a movement that says something, that has its own language. So this is a very creative time, and feel free to stop and go as much as you want. And maybe Maybe it takes you your whole rehearsal time just to do a small portion. Don't rush this part, because this is now time set aside to spontaneously create, and it will be very rewarding for you. Improvisation just requires trying other things, like a scientist. Just you're in the lab, you're just going to try ideas, and ideas beget ideas, and you'll find that soon you are popping with ideas, and you can then begin to see which one, based on the rest of the action, would be the best choice. So after your stop and go rehearsal, then you need to reassemble the whole piece again as one piece, reconstituted. And so you want to do some no-stop runs, 2 or 3 at least. And these are moving straight through your piece from the beginning to the end without stopping. And insist and discipline yourself and demand that you will make no stop. So you don't stop if you make a mistake. If you forget something, you improvise. But pretend that you're on the stage already, and there is no stopping. There is no redoing something. There's no, oh, excuse me, I missed that. None of that. You must just go on. And you will learn a lot by doing that if you stick to that demand. Because you will learn, number one, where your weak spots are. Your weak spots can be places where you're having technical difficulty, where you're having difficulty connecting to the next thing or from the thing before. You may be having difficulty in a highly skilled activity that you really need to hone up on the actual skill of that particular part. It will tell you where your weaknesses are, so that you can then take them apart again and work on them separately, and then stick them back in, patch them back in. Now, after you've done this, then you're going to start to ask yourself some general questions about pacing, the sort of sculpted rhythm that you're using. After you've gotten it all together and you've done your no stops and you've built out the fascia, then you really can see what the shape of the play is as it rolls out. Is it going to be a run at a pace that is too fast or too slow for the meaning of your content? So some content takes a much slower pace for the audience to get it. And then other content needs to be paced rather quickly so as not to bore the audience. It's these kinds of decisions that now you need to make. So put yourself back in the mode of no-stop runs, only this time you must add the last ingredients, the last parts, which are your costume and your props, the real costume, the real props, the real set. You can use substitutes most of the way up until now, but at the last you must start working with the actual prop, the actual costume, the actual hairpin you're going to be using in the show, and to deal with the sound cues that are going to form the audible background of your piece, if there are any. It's really, really important. The cardinal rule of the theater is you never, ever, ever go on the stage with your presentation working with a prop, no matter how small, how insignificant, or working with a piece of costume, a set piece, that you have not worked with it in rehearsal. So no matter how much you think the substitute prop that you're working with is close enough and there won't be any problem and I'll just grab the real prop at the last minute, or the real piece of my costume or hair or any of that kind of stuff, anything, because you will be unfortunately, unpleasantly surprised on the stage when you find something is not working as you expected it to work. I'll give you another really good example. I was doing a dance theater piece, and there was a difficult very difficult dance in there. And I was using flags, the kind of, rotating flags that are on a baton. And the baton was not functioning so well, and I gave it to somebody to fix. And meanwhile, I was using just a substitute that was working for me in rehearsal. And it came up to the time of performance, and the baton, I still didn't have the authentic baton. And finally, the person who was fixing it for me came rushing in at the last moment and handed it to me. Now, I made a decision then that was really stupid. I should never have made that decision. And I can tell you I never made it again. And that was to accept that prop and to work with it in performance, having never worked with it in rehearsal, even though it was identical to the one I was using almost. Because there was a small little piece of wire, about 1/4 of an inch, very, very small, very thin wire, that was inside a cylinder, and you couldn't really see it. And if it had stayed in the cylinder, it wouldn't have been any problem. But instead, as I twirled the flag, it worked its way out of the cylinder until it was actually sticking out of the cylinder. And as I did a kind of lasso turn over my head with that flag baton, that little piece of wire caught my hairpiece that I was wearing. I was wearing a hairpiece that was quite long. It caught it and flung it the length of the stage. It was really actually quite stunning and very funny. The audience, of course, laughed because it was terribly comic. I don't blame them for laughing. I was laughing too, except that inside I was really horrified, because this was a very elegant piece, and it certainly was not a comic piece, and it wasn't funny at that moment. It was only funny afterwards. But it serves me right, because I violated this very cardinal rule. I had not worked with that baton, even though it was identical to the other one, except for the part that they'd fixed. And if I had worked with it, I would have realized, okay, listen, this wire has to be cut off because it's likely to come off when I twirl it. I can see that's going to happen. But I accepted it and worked with it without having applied that caution and the knowledge that this could certainly be a very bad thing on stage. I have had many experiences like that, both as a director and as a performer. So I did learn pretty early on the validity of that rule, and I would advise you never, ever to work with anything. That includes hairdos. That includes the way you're going to have your hair on the stage, especially if you're a woman, and the pieces of hardware that you're going to use to keep your hair in place. Make sure you have the exact ones that you need and that you're going to have on the stage. Make sure you're rehearsing with them and have your hair in exactly the right corresponding style, so you can see if it holds during the action and all of the variables that will be presented by real action on the stage. Okay, so then the last part of this structure is, once you have it all together then, and you reassembled it after you worked on those parts that were weak, and you have all your real costumes, props, and sound being used, the last step is to find yourself an audience, a practice audience. That means somebody who's alive, okay? So I would grab anybody who's willing to sit and listen to your piece. It's not important that they be an expert on the subject or an expert in theater, anything. You simply want a live human being that will certainly be a stimulus. So when I say a stimulus, I mean it's going to be a distraction. Whenever, no matter who it is, even if it's the dog practically, whenever we are faced with somebody watching us, we are different. definitely different. And it affects our pacing, it affects our external expression, it affects our sense of fear, of being accepted, of being judged. It's a distraction. This is why rehearsing in a studio or any other place that is a practice space can never replicate the experience of performance, live performance. Never. Because you can never replicate a live audience. And it is the live audience that is the greatest distraction for you once you're on the stage. So the key to rehearsal, rehearsing your parts and then assembling them together, collecting them together, is repetition, 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 repetition. So the physical action and the memory work of lines and choreography and all of that must be rehearsed sufficient number of repetitions so that it goes downward in the brain, into the brain stem, and can be done almost automatically, the same way you ride a bike or drive a car. So when you first began to drive or ride those two things, you were extremely hyper focused on the mechanical skill of driving or riding. And you couldn't do anything else. You needed all of your focus just to think about how to turn the car, when to stop, how to turn your wheels, etc. It's the same way when you learn your piece. That includes learning your lines or learning your blocking or learning those special mechanical skills. It's difficult in the beginning, and the way that you make it secure so that you actually don't have to think about it in the same way that you don't have to think about riding a bike after you've ridden one for many years, or driving a car. You do it automatically because it operates from the brainstem as a function of long-term repetition. So there's no getting around it, folks. Repetition is it. And lots of people don't like to repeat, okay? They find it boring. But I can offer you two suggestions. One isn't really a suggestion. Maybe it's an inspiration and a verification that it works. But all artists understand the efficacy of repetition, no matter how experienced you are. And Pablo Casals, one of the greatest musicians in the world, and certainly one of the world's greatest cello players ever, when he was 80, was rehearsing for a concert with the New York Metropolitan Orchestra and was being interviewed on television by a music expert, and asked him how he prepared for such a concert like this, especially, that now that he was 80 and had already been such a consummate musician for so many decades, did he still need to practice? And he said, oh my goodness, he said, I practice 5-6 hours a day. But if I'm performing, why then I practice about 2 or 3 hours more. And the musician said, well, how do you practice that long? What are you practicing? Do you just go through the piece, your parts that you're playing? He said, no. He said, I practice 80% of that time, I practice just scales. And even though this was a musical expert who was interviewing him, he looked genuinely surprised. He said, scales? He said, but you are this great world-renowned, musician. Why are you still practicing scales? This is rather fundamental learning for beginning musicians. And he said, no. He said, the skill is in the fundamentals. And you never get too old to rehearse the fundamentals and repeat them until they're so solidly down in your brain that you can't make a mistake on stage. And of course, this is the truth, because as you put mechanical things down into the brainstem, which include your lines and your movement and your technique for difficult things, you leave the soul free and the cerebral cortex free for spontaneous connecting, number one, communicating with your live audience, which is a live event. You can't rehearse that. The audience is different every time you come to the stage, and therefore the chemistry between the audience and you will be different every single time, and it will affect you unless you're a robot on stage. And you want it to affect you because theater is a wonderful chemistry factory of live energies from audience to performers back and forth. And second, your spontaneous creativity will be highlighted on stage. You can find immediate small changes and improvised things, reactions to things that happen when you're free. But if you are still trying to remember exactly those mechanical tasks, and they're not down in the brainstem operating automatically like riding a bike, then they will take dominance, and your performance will be quite wooden and robotic and without that marvelous, exciting, live reaction to life as it happens to you, present tense. So, finish this off then. Third category, information I wanted to pass on to you are the rewards and the richness that you can expect when you have rehearsed your own piece. And the first one of those is that you really will feel inspired. I guarantee you will. It's just like anything else that we do. Even if we make a dish for dinner that we've never made before, or plant successfully a plant that blooms or can be harvested as something to eat. We feel so inspired by that. Look at what we did. We took a seed and we grew something, or we took some ingredients in the kitchen, we put them together, and look at that. It turned out so wonderful. It was so good to eat or so pretty to see. And we're inspired. We are motivated to do it again and to understand that we are creative people, and that we have that ability to create, to build something, to make something. Second, we are energized. You'll be energized by it. So no matter how tired you feel, I have to go and rehearse this. Oh my gosh, this is such hard work. I'm telling you, once you begin to rehearse, you will never end up the rehearsal exhausted. Or you may be physically tired from some physical work you've done in the rehearsal, but you won't be tired in your soul. You'll be actually energized in your soul, because again, energy begets energy. Energy creates more energy, and even if you are physically tired from the physical work in the rehearsal, you will in your soul feel energized and more alive than when you began. Third, you will heighten your ability to discover, and that will become fun for you. You'll realize, well, this was really actually quite fun. I discovered a lot of things. I explored some things, and in exploring things and ideas, I discovered some things I didn't know before, and that's always exciting. It's the game of discovery. It's the game of hunt and chase and find, and this is fun stuff. Lastly, you will be rewarded by the confidence this will give you. When you've rehearsed your piece and you've rehearsed it well like this, you will find that you will do well on the stage. You will do very well on the stage, and this will grow your confidence. And the next piece that you do, you will be more confident. And this sense of confidence on the stage is a huge benefit. It's not just a virtue of character. It is a huge benefit that is translated to the audience in a verification of your message being something they should listen to. So when the audience experiences an inexperienced artist on the stage, this translates in the negative way. The message that they are communicating on the stage does not get validated by the audience. It's somehow connected to the insecurity they feel coming from the performer. So those two things are related, and that will grow in you. So I encourage you with all of my heart to receive the mandate of self-rehearsal. Learn to do it, experiment, and you'll get better and better at it, and you will be very rewarded. And just like the old truism, don't give somebody a fish if they're hungry. Instead, teach them how to fish. So you should have an aspiration to be independent as an artist. It's wonderful to have directors and teachers and other colleagues that you can collaborate with, and theater is a collaborative art form, but you must never be dependent on them. You must always be able to be an independent artist on your own. Then when you do have the privilege of collaborating, you'll be an even more valuable contributor to the project. So, happy rehearsing, everybody. Fun to be with you. And if there are other ideas or things you want to talk about on this channel, just leave a message. Visit us again. Thanks for listening. Till next time we meet here on the podcast channel, Whispers in the Wings. You've been listening to Kathleen Ann Thompson, Director of Bellhurst Productions. Visit us at www.bellhurst.com.